The World's Greatest Leprechaun Hunt by Deborah Tyler. Far away in a land which was known as the Emerald Isle, there was a kingdom. It was a small kingdom, and it was very poor. Its farms never seemed to thrive, and even its castle was shabby. The only person in the kingdom who seemed to thrive was Prince James. He was the son of King Maura and Queen Mag, and he was very spoiled. When he did not get just what he wanted, he would let out a high-pitched squeal and start throwing things. As the court jester had once pointed out, he was really quite nasty. Now, the kingdom of King Maura and Queen Mag was surrounded by magic woods. Sometimes when people passed through them, they could hear strange laughter. And often visitors felt as if they were being followed by many pairs of tiny eyes or heard the patter of tiny footsteps among the leaves. If they had been quick enough and nimble on their feet, they might have caught a glimpse of a green velvet waistcoat or the flash of a bushy red beard. For the Magic Wood was the home of the leprechauns who had lived on the Emerald Isle for years and years and years. For those of you who have never seen a leprechaun before, they are very small and wear three-cornered hats, smart breeches, red shirts, and green velvet waistcoats with shiny buttons. But the most striking thing about them is their hair, for it is always long and red and matches their bushy beards perfectly. Now, leprechauns are tricky little creatures and usually keep well out of the way of humans, which isn't always easy. For there is a legend in the Emerald Isle that if you catch a leprechaun and look him in the eye, a crack of gold and 3 wishes could be yours. At the time of our story, Prince James had come of age, but this did not stop him from throwing the most terrible tantrums. If the king asked him to do something, he usually shouted, "Shut!" and pulled a face. He was sulking terribly on the day of his birthday because he wanted to have a huge birthday party and his mother and father couldn't afford it. They had spoiled him for so long they had no money left. "It's no good," the king said one day. "We need a crack of gold. We shall have to capture a leprechaun. Send for my knights." So the best knights in the kingdom were sent for, and they all set out on what came to be known as the world's greatest leprechaun hunt. Leprechauns are mischievous little men, and they love practical jokes better than anything. So as soon as they heard that the knights were coming to track them down, they prepared many traps. The most tricky leprechaun in the forest was called King Sean, and he had a beautiful daughter called Maura, who was as lovely and as tiny as a china doll. Maura had often seen the knights before as they rode through the woods with the prince. She was secretly in love with Prince James and owned a large picture of him. The world's greatest leprechaun hunt was not exactly a great triumph. One knight had followed a little man into a glade. He had stood behind a tree, preparing to pounce while the leprechaun lit a clay pipe. Then, when he actually tried to grab his victim, he found that another little man had fastened him to the tree with strong twine. Another knight had been chased home by 4 little men who had pelted him with hundreds of tiny shoes. As leprechauns make shoes, they had a great supply. Other knights had vanished down holes, landing in thick mud when they got to the bottom. Twine and leaves had been made into catapults, which shot berries at them, and leprechauns swung down on vines with cakes of mud that made a nasty mess of their armor. In fact, when the prince walked over to see how the great hunt was progressing, he was almost trampled on by knights who were running away. "Come back!" shouted the prince. But the knights just kept on running. Prince James leaned against a tree. "It's all my fault that the kingdom is poor," he said to himself. "But what on earth can I do to put things right?" Just then he heard a tiny voice. "Please, sir," it said, "I can help you." James looked down and saw Maura standing before him. She was the smallest and prettiest girl that he had ever seen. "I can find you a leprechaun," she said. "My father is their king." So saying, she took the prince by the hand and led him to her father. When her father heard her step, he turned round and looked James straight in the eye. Thus it was that Prince James could claim a crock of gold and 3 wishes. "Well," said Jean crossly, "name your first wish." The prince thought hard, and though he knew he should do otherwise, he decided that the kingdom could wait. "I want a new horse," he said. There was a flash of emerald light, and a lovely white horse stood before him. "I wanted a black one," said James rudely. The leprechaun went red in the face. "What is your second wish?" he said angrily. "A new coat," said James, who had decided that the kingdom could wait until last. There was a flash of blue light, and a brilliant sapphire coat appeared upon the prince's back, which fastened itself up rather neatly. "It's too tight," whined the prince. "No," said the leprechaun king, bristling with rage. "You are too fat. I am tired of your moaning and groaning, and will not grant your last wish until you take me to the palace." Then he jumped upon the horse and got Maura and James to do the same. They rode to the court, and when they got there, King Shan told Mag and Marrow the whole story. The king and queen were ashamed of their son's behavior, and were sorry that he was so spoiled. In short, they wished to teach him a lesson, but they didn't know how. "I will give you one last wish and a crock of gold if I can have a wish of my own granted," said the little man. The king and queen agreed, and their son sulked. So, under much protest, the prince asked for a prosperous kingdom. When he had done so, all the castle shook, and there was a blinding ray of pink light before their eyes. When it had gone, the castle gleamed as if it had been painted. The grass glowed a rich emerald green, and the flowers in all the window boxes blossomed like jewels. On all the farms the cattle grew fat and crops grew tall. "Now for my wish," said the little man. "I want your son to marry my daughter, as she loves him, although I wish I knew why." The royal couple agreed at once, for they thought Maura was lovely, and the prince, well, he just sulked. The wedding date was set without the consent of the prince. The castle chapel was decorated with glittering paper shamrocks, pale green candles, and berries and wild roses from the forest. On the day of the wedding, Maura wore a lovely gown of woven water lilies and spider webs. The prince was so cross about the whole affair that he had gone purple in the face, which really matched his robes very well. The ceremony was about to begin, and knights and leprechauns filled the pews, when Maura cried, "Stop!" The whole court was silent. "I cannot marry you unless you love me for myself," she continued. "Your selfishness has made everyone unhappy, even you. Now it is time you started behaving like a proper prince." Suddenly James realized how dreadful he had been. He thought of his poor father and mother and how awful he had been to everyone. Above all, he saw how horrid he had been to Maura, who had loved him so unselfishly when really he had secretly loved her all along. "I will marry you, Maura," said James, "and I will be a well-loved prince." Maura smiled, and so the wedding ceremony began. And when James finally kissed his bride, she grew to be as tall as he was. King Shan went back to his home in the Magic Woods, though he always went to the castle for tea on Sundays, and the leprechauns carried on playing tricks on anyone who went looking for crocks of gold behind the trees. Even today, if you should ever travel to the Emerald Isle and walk through the woods there, you just might be lucky enough to hear leprechaun laughter. From among the trees, or catch a glimpse of a bushy red beard, or a velvet waistcoat fastened with shiny buttons.